Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Subchakchai-Bankard, and I'm here with two friends, always one, but born as two. First, he has no name, but the Jedi might call him a podcaster. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
When you're looking up to heroes, you don't have to face what's right in front of you. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
Wow, that's an interesting stance for you to take this early on in the episode, but I like it.
I'm ready.
And he's accepted his darkness. What have you done with yours? It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Jen, put your clothes on. I'm good. I couldn't not go with a Yord quote to get a little, quick head-turning action right at the beginning of the episode. But I'm good. It's good to see you both and very excited to be here to nerd out a little today.
I know. I'm excited too. For the record, I tried initially to have your joke be a Yord reference. I was something about like he's been steaming his clothes too long or something like that, but then I couldn't quite get it right, so I backed off. But now I regret that. So, listeners, those were all references to the Star Wars Disney Plus series that concluded a couple weeks ago. Leslie Headland's The Acolyte. But I thought this was a movie podcast, you might ask, and it is. But guess what? We're also huge Star Wars nerds. We're not going to apologize for it. I'm not going to apologize for it anymore. This is the journey that I've been on. PT has been constantly asking for Star Wars episodes. But our agenda today is to look back at the entire first and hopefully not the last season of The Acolyte to share it. Did someone just make a sad noise?
Yes. Well, it seems like they would have announced it last weekend. That's all I'm going to say. We'll talk. We'll talk.
We're going to share our thoughts, our hopes, our dreams in response to some of the recent announcements about Star Wars. There's been a bunch of announcements, some new stuff coming out of the D23 Expo that concluded this past weekend. That's probably going to be the bulk of our movie news update. Not per our usual, we are going to have this be a spoiler-ridden episode from the beginning. Usually we try to do a spoiler-free episode, but, the show ended a little while ago, and it's Star Wars, and you can spoil anything at any time. So if you have not seen The Acolyte and don't want to hear anything about any of the trailers or promotional materials that has just come out about upcoming Star Wars stories, we invite you to peruse our back catalog for some other fantastic episodes. Maybe a Deadpool and Wolverine review is more your speed right now. But PT, if listeners think we're not getting kicked out of the Jedi Order after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Well, if you have accepted your darkness and want to know what we've done with ours, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, and more. Wherever you are listening right now, you will be able to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. And on Letterboxd, you can follow our account at LTRpod or search for our hashtag where you can find each of our individual movie review posts up there, hashtag LTRpod. Jen?
Thanks, PT. So we are just about ready to get into our discussion of The Acolyte, but first we have an extended, I never get to say that, movie news update.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
Is that the Star Wars edition of this?
Yeah.
Pew, pew, or we need the vroom.
That's a type.
All right, so there is technically other movie news probably that we could talk about, but since this is our sort of Star Wars spotlight episode that we do periodically, I wanted to talk about all the new Star Wars stuff. So the biggest movie news, I think, I don't know if maybe you can't call it news unless you were actually there, but at D23 they had Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni come out and give kind of an update on the new Star Wars movie, The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is supposed to come out. I have May 22nd, 2026. That's kind of far away. But what did you two think about that? Because that's our big movie news, and then we can get to the other stuff.
I heard they already shot a little bit, which to me sounds like they needed to get Pedro Pascal's beautiful face before he ran off and did some other project. But I don't know. I left Mando kind of satisfied with the journey we'd been on across 3 seasons and not really with a lot of questions that really needed to come to the big screen. And so I think I personally have some confusion about this, plus the other Dave Filoni movie, which is supposed to be the kind of culmination of all that era of Disney Plus shows. But am I gonna be there? I'll be there 4 times opening night. Like, who am I kidding at this point? Like, of course I'll be there, and I will live in the theater for a month. So, of course, but they got to win me over still for this one. That's where I'm sitting.
Yeah, win me over is probably too strong for me because it's like I'm here, I'm gonna be there. It does feel a little safe to be like, okay, who are the 2 biggest characters that everyone seems to like in the Disney era? Let's relaunch our movies with those 2. We'll figure it out when we get there. And so presumably they figured it out. It feels like, and maybe we can, when we talk about the wider Star Wars TV landscape later on in the episode, touch on this a little bit more, but it kind of feels like they ended at a point where it's like, this could be, we could be back at a place where the Mandalorian is the continuing adventures, the weekly adventures of the Mandalorian. And now with his little friend, and they go off and they hunt a bounty and then they bring him back and that's it. And it could be a procedural almost. And instead of doing that for a year, it's going to be a movie. And that's interesting. Like, what exactly that's going to be? Is it going to be, this is the sort of interstitial almost before the story continues of the wider New Republic world that we've been seeing across these different Filoniverse, Favreau and Filoniverse shows, or is this going to be like a bigger version? Like it almost feels like this could be a wheel spinning, like in the grand narrative, but a fun little adventure that happens to be on the big screen. Or is this going to be tied into, the big plot that is trying to unfold, leading to the aforementioned Filoni movie, Heir to the Empire, with an uncertain amount of connections to the book from the 90s. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting. It feels a little weird. I'm glad they filmed stuff. I still feel like it's possible they announced this is actually going to be a 6-episode TV series instead of a movie, because they're notorious for the last 5 years or so of having a movie idea and then it going away or it being reshaped. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Jen, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, just to pick up on what you were just talking about, I do feel like I saw on the panel that Dave Filoni said that Jon Favreau was sort of teaching him how to make a movie during this production so far, and so that tells me that it's definitely going to be a movie. But if they're doing, you know what I mean, like if they're approaching it, that sounds like the approach is wholly something that Filoni is not familiar with, right? Which means they didn't. That's to me a big indication that they didn't like, oops, this is actually a movie, not a TV show. Like that from the conception was a movie, hopefully. Because I think that is the big question mark, right? Is like, was this supposed to? Did they originally think of this as season 4 of The Mandalorian, and then they were like, wait, like people are really clamoring for Star Wars on the big screen. These are our most famous characters. Let's port them over. I still have questions about how well, because these, if we think about it, Mando and Grogu are only characters that have been on small screen. They have never been on the big screen. And so just to see what kind of story would be necessary to help them make that transition, I think is trickier than we'd think. But yeah, but I mean, of course, yeah, like all that said, like I'm super excited no matter what. And they did make a big deal about like Star Wars is finally coming back to the big screen, which, we as a film podcast, I think are always going to be excited about. It's been too long since we've had a Star Wars movie, I think. So I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this is how standalone this is versus how much of a stepping stone this is to the other movie, right?
And also how much of it is going to require you to remember the minutia of the first 3 seasons of The Mandalorian,
right,
plus the Book of Boba Fett, which is essentially a Mandalorian like sub-series. And and even maybe parts of Ahsoka, which is a adjacent, like how and now they're going to be like, oh, and remember this from the Skeleton Crew, and it could be a bunch of people who only go to the movies for Star Wars who are going to be like, what? No, like what are you talking about? And so, yeah, it'll be interesting. I hope there is at some point, and I know Lucasfilm in the post George era has not been as forthcoming with these sort of behind the scenes things, but I hope there is a big behind the scenes breakdown down the road, maybe, of all the Favreau Filoni developments, because there's been some interesting twists and turns in the last few seasons they've put out, and leading into this movie to see how did it come about. Is this were they always like, maybe now would be the time to make a movie? Were they working on season 4 and they said, we don't really have enough here, maybe this is the time to make this transition? Was there a sort of an order from up above of like, look, we don't like, there's all these options, but like, we don't know who we need our most popular people in the theaters first, so can you guys do this? And they adapted what they had. We don't know. It would be great to find out someday. I don't think we're going to find out in the press for this movie, because they're going to tell us what they think marketing wants to hear.
I just want to add, everybody loves Baby Yoda and Mando. Like, they don't call him Grogu.
Yeah.
You know,
That
take
stuck.
a kid wearing a Baby Yoda shirt out in public, and you will see how little that name has penetrated. But I wonder too, because, you know, if we're 2 years from it, and that's, you know, a solid 4 from the day he took over the internet, it just feels like they're striking pretty late on this. So I have questions about that, if that'll work. I will confess I have not yet heard the Deadpool Wolverine episode, but I imagine as a part of the the Marvel wobble, we all can identify that these, you know, the way they require you to see shows to watch movies has really hurt the Marvel brand. And I worry, you know, listening to PT really articulate all that, like, yeah, there are a lot of people who aren't going to be up for that and are mad. It feels like the film industry is at a moment where they need to convince you that you don't need to be doing homework. And so how will this enter into that? And will we even be there in 2 years? Who knows?
I think the best case scenario is that, because think about where we left off with these characters at the end of season 3, right? They're on the porch living, like, starting off their quiet life together, supposedly. And so I feel like that makes it so that this movie could very easily, if they were trying to do you don't need to know anything else, right? This can stand on its own. It might have references to other things, but that's optional, right? Like, that would be the smart way to do it. And they could do it if it's like Mando and Grogu on the porch get like pulled away for a mission, like they need to help with something, and then they go back, right? And then that allows the TV show to kind of like pick up there too if it needs to. So I don't know. I mean, the thing we haven't mentioned is that, you know, obviously none of us were at D23, but apparently they showed Zeb Aurelius, who's a character who has only appeared in live action in Mando season 3, but is a character from Star Wars Rebels, which is the animated series. See, this is already getting too complicated.
I can't imagine why it would be a problem.
He's part of the New Republic storyline that has been seeded in each of these shows, right? Of like, this is what's happening. Yeah, I don't know, Greg, go ahead.
And where was he seated in that photo? Did you notice?
No. Wait, what?
The cockpit of the Razor Crest. So go ahead and figure that one out. I don't know. So did they rebuild the Razor Crest? Is there a different Razor Crest?
My memory, when he got his new ship, which of course did not happen in The Mandalorian, it happened in the Book of Boba Fett, a show that was absolutely not about The Mandalorian. When he got his new ship, it was because he was asking Pelimoto, Amy Sedaris' character, I want a new Razor Crest. And she's like, well, I'll look to get you one, but for now, you should take this. So that's because I can recall this because I had just spent money on a Razor Crest HasLab, and then it immediately got blown up, and people were like, what the hell? And so then the next time there was a TV show, they were like, no, we'll get another Razor Crest. So it's always sort of been presumed, at least in the toy collecting community, they're building towards, they wanted a few years to sell us refurbished N1 Naboo starfighters in the Mando style to be next to it, but then they were going to get a Razor Crest for Mando back. So that does make sense that that Zeb could be in one, because maybe that's where it comes back. I will just note, it would be funny that if you go back and watch, which I will admit I have not done since season 3 of The Mandalorian aired, but I feel like if you go back and you watch seasons 1 through 3 in a binge on Disney Plus, season 2 ends and then season 3 begins with just like, anyway, all the important stuff there didn't matter, because like Grogu's not, Baby Yoda's not gone, Luke Skywalker's not around, like forget it, like they're back together and don't worry about it. And it would be funny if functionally the movie does the same thing with season 3, where it's like, anyway, they're not retired. It doesn't matter that that they're hanging out. I think they're back in action, in the same kind of action they were in before. Which, again, is fine. Star Wars narratives are very cyclical. But it would be not the first time that it kind of feels like we got to go back to the safe narrative that everyone wants and get us back in a reset, which is very TV. But this is a movie, so that's going to be, that's going to be interesting.
What is the popcorn bucket going to look like for this? That's what I want to know. The trend is not good. Where we're trending.
It could just be an upside down, like an empty Mando helmet, and then it's like,
that's what I think it's got to be, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, it's like it's Grogu looking like the Wolverine bucket, and no one wants that.
We don't want that. No one wants that.
No, nobody wants that.
That would be some kind of crime against humanity. So the next big news was a trailer that actually the public could see, right? The Mando stuff was all sort of leaked on the internet, right? Which I didn't actually see any video footage, only images. And that's true for, okay, everyone's nodding. So there wasn't something I missed. Skeleton Crew is the next Disney Plus series starring Jude Law. What are our thoughts?
December. It's a long time from now to go without Star Wars content. Speaking as a spoiled modern fan, I mean, we have one Marvel show between now and then, but Disney Plus is definitely slowing down the pace. Was a big takeaway, I think, on this, which is totally fair. Look, it looks like they had a board meeting where somebody said, what if we make an Amblin movie set in the Star Wars galaxy? And that guy was John Watts, who directed some pretty successful Spider-Man movies. And so let's do it. Let's do exactly that. It looked pretty fun. I think it will not be that serious. And I think maybe we could use a little of that in Star Wars. So I'm in, right? I mean, again, I'm always in, but like I was excited when I saw this.
Yeah, I was too. That I feel like the pitch of, I don't know if it was so Amblin tied when he would talk about it, but it was that this is going to be a kid's adventure of kids from a local community going off into space and entering into a Star Wars adventure. So that is exactly what it looked like. It obviously harkened back to those Amblin movies of the 80s. It also really reminded me of The Last Starfighter, which is a personal favorite, probably a movie that doesn't actually hold up unless you were the right age when it came out or watched it when you were of the right age. But a similar, just like, I live a normal life in a small town. Wait, there's an intergalactic battle that I'm going to get roped into. And that looks pretty cool. I'm always a little concerned if like, oh, this is a story about kids, where like I try to be honest with myself of like, well, I guess I am a middle-aged man, and so I'm not really a child. So maybe this won't speak to me in the way that it would speak to a 10-year-old or
all the toys in your house say otherwise.
Correct. That's a great point. I'm able to be very childish, but I'm excited, even however I feel about it, I'm excited for the possibility that there may be a Goonies-like show that people who are of the age of the characters could really see themselves in it and be like, yes, like that could be me. And it becomes like this lifelong love for them that this really connects. So, trying to think outside of myself for probably the only time on this podcast. I'm excited for that, for that generation to potentially have a show like that. And I'm also excited to watch it on my own as a man-child. Jen, what do you think?
So my favorite thing in this trailer, or the thing that gave me kind of the most hope and optimism about the show, or got me the most excited, was the idea that the kids like stumble across or find Jude Law and are like, "Whoa!" Right? And
Mhm.
so what
as
that tells
we
me,
all would be.
yeah, of course,
Whoa,
yes.
it's Jude Law.
What is Jude Law doing here?
The new
You
pope
could-
here in my hometown? Wow.
Napkin
no-
face. Oh my
I said no-
god.
I said no Pope jokes. Fine. Because now we have to explain. What if people don't know that he was in a show? No,
No.
I went for the joke because it didn't need explaining, right?
Yeah. Okay,
People
okay,
just
all right.
know he was in the show called The New Pope.
Okay.
And he was napkin face in The Holiday. That's all. I made my joke.
Anyway, so my actual point was that, like, the way that they react to Jude Law in the trailer makes me think that the ensemble of kids really are the leads, and that Jude is supporting. Because I feel like when they pitched the show back at like a celebration or whenever they first announced it, it was like, oh, Jude Law starring in a Star Wars series, right? This makes me think he probably is actually not that much of the show, potentially, or that he is he is a side character, right? Like they are reacting to finding him at some point in the show. So that actually got me excited, because I was like, was I that interested in Jude Law leading a Star Wars series? Like, I like Jude Law just fine, but like, I don't know. But that to make it a true Amblin thing with the kids, I think was the thing I got excited about.
It was weird, the cross wires of, it's a show about a kid's going on an adventure and it stars Jude Law. It's just like, well, that doesn't quite track, but it's this.
Well, they have to market it that way because Jude Law gets butts in the seats, right? Like people like Jude Law. He's a name. So I get it. But I'm just really glad that like the spirit of the show seems to be really focused on the kids.
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard to promise that Amblin energy without that, right?
I can see the kids just looking across kind of a foggy valley and being like, is that the Sky Captain in the world of tomorrow?
Oh my gosh.
Wow. But
Greg just has Jude Law's filmography in front of him and he's just trying to work everything in.
They're like, oh my God, it's Alfie. Not that one. The later one.
The later Alfie. Well, and to your point about the kids, which was your real point, I think is really good. And I will say, I really like the design of the crew, right? We have a prominently placed alien, which I think a lot of people have kind of said, if Star Wars is about all these species, we should have more of a central alien. And I believe he is not an ortolan, which is Max Rebo's species, but he looks a lot like an ortolan.
I just assumed he was.
The Leland Chi, the Holocron Keeper, shared essentially his page in the Lucasfilm database of elephantine species, and there are a lot. And Neil was separate from ortolans, so I think he's a new species. But we'll see.
They don't want to chime in on whether ortolans have hands, because the actual design was that Max Rebo just had legs and was playing his keyboard with his legs, with his feet.
Yeah.
And they don't want to, the action figures spoke differently in the early 80s. So I don't think they don't want to weigh in on that controversy. So they're just like, he's a ortolan. And then it's like a different side species.
There's just a little girl who has like a Geordie LaForge visor, and she looks very much like Jarek, who was a villain in Jedi Knight, one of the old Legends video games, and kind of looks like might be the Ke Huy Quan in Goonies. I forget what his Goonies character is. The data of this crew, kind of tied into maybe a little droid technology. So that got me excited.
I was just going to say, I saw this on the internet, but didn't fact check it. So I'm sorry if this is wrong, but there's a little critter that's from Captain EO. Did you know this?
Oh,
he's like a little fuzzy guy with wings.
Yeah.
They just show him really quickly in a cage somewhere. And I'm like, what? I love Captain EO. And that's a really good, weird, like 6 degrees of George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola, and like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It seems like a really fun reference to have in there.
that seems to tie in well with the ETs in the Phantom Menace Senate scene, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, like there are Earth connections, because I think isn't Captain EO still originally Earthbound, like, or at least that's the implication. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought that Captain EO was supposed to be a Earth human
On Earth.
who was off in, well, or at least was from Earth and then was off in space.
Oh, I see. Maybe
Here to save
it'd
the
be,
world, of course.
It would be like a Star-Lord situation, like what?
Right.
Could be.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not up on my EO lore.
All of us go silent as we mentally go through the Captain EO canon, which I'm sure
I'm singing "We Are Here to Save the World" in my head.
I'm like, I saw Captain EO like once, and I saw it at Epcot, right? That's isn't it actually in Tomorrowland, or was
it was in Tomorrowland?
It was.
Yeah,
it was. They brought it back at some point for a period, and then
it
went away again.
R.I.P. It was when Michael Jackson died, and they were like, well, right. Everyone's just decided to put aside the questionable parts, so we're just gonna love Captain EO, and it got replaced by something else that I can't remember. I don't know what's there now, but they had it there for like almost a decade, I think.
In Disney World, it was like the Honey I Shrunk the Kids theater,
and
then they made it Captain EO for a while, and then I don't know what it went, because I haven't been to Disney World in a really long time, but I don't know.
It's in the Imagination Pavilion at Epcot. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Everything you just said is accurate. I think
this is why we
was EO, and then it became Honey I Shrunk the Audience, and then it became Captain EO again. But yeah.
Oh, maybe. See, this is why we need Mary Purdue.
Yeah,
here,
a Disney expert,
resident. Yes. All right. So yeah, we're excited about this. I don't know. Some people seem mad about the. I don't know that it's so Amblin looking. I don't know.
I think there's people who who are annoyed that there's like Star Wars suburbs, which like feels completely like, sure, of course, why not? Why wouldn't there be? There's many places, and some of them might look like places on Earth, but they think it's too Earth based. And then, as was we discussed over text, which is very exciting for our listeners to hear about. There are people who just are very anti some of those Amblin movies. Like, they feel like it's empty Gen X nostalgia bait. The Goonies in particular as a target for film snobs of just like, that movie's actually terrible. And that's, if you like that movie, you don't actually, you don't ever interrogate your childhood. You only like embrace your happy nostalgia. Which I don't think is true. I think Goonies holds up. I think it's a fun movie. I think they're just old cranks, but yeah, I think there's people that are just like, well, I don't like that. And I don't like that there's suburbs in Star Wars. And I don't like anything about Star Wars that happened in the last X number of years. So yeah, those people are going to exist, and long may they be unhappy.
I'm really curious to see how much of this is a simulacrum of actual Goonies and Amblin movies versus like Stranger Things, which is inspired by it, but is trying to do its own thing. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder what will the intersection between Amblin and Star Wars actually produce? Will it be something new, or will it just be like you said, like the suburbs are not very Star Wars-y maybe, but like because they're part of the Amblin kind of vibe, then we need them. I don't know.
Look, the shot of the suburbs that's making everybody angry. Sure. Does it look weird that there's like streets with a curb in Star Wars? Yes. But there's an Ithorian walking his dog-like creature down it. So I'm in, right? Like, I'm here for it. Like, yeah. Like, it may be silly. I thought a little bit about the third Guardians of the Galaxy movies has that weird planet that there's an in-universe reason why it kind of looks like 1970s Earth, and sure, whatever. And that whole sequence didn't really hit for me because it felt a little too bizarre, but I still think, like, who cares? Like, curbs and a road is something that makes sense on any planet with a vehicle. So why wouldn't that exist on one of the planets in Star Wars or what have you? So I'm here for it. But not to push the agenda, but Jen, we got to talk about this third one because this is the one I'm really excited
for. That's why I saved it for last. So season 2 of Andor, they announced will premiere on Disney Plus in 2025. So that is sooner them The Mandalorian and Grogu. That's
Mm-hmm.
2026. So it's not that far away, unless it's like December 2025, in which case, which
No.
it very well could be. You know what I mean? Or the fall of 2025, which we have to wait a little longer. But what are your thoughts? I think, Greg, you have more of an inside scoop on what they actually showed, right? Because I don't want to force you to admit that you.
No. Yeah. So I mean, Disney showed what I think is probably best classified as a sizzle reel, which is not fully a trailer. It's more kind of behind the scenes and them being excited about making it. That sizzle reel was not formally released on the internet to the general public, but there were kind of handheld, hand shot versions of it that appeared online. Neither of you have seen that or stills from that?
Nope.
All right. Well, let's first just say I'm really excited for Andor. Andor is an incredible project. It will always be among my favorite Star Wars, no matter how much more Star Wars they make. And so I'm really excited to have it back. I'm really excited to have Diego Luna back. And he was on stage talking about it. And it's like, oh, I forgot he's like a total delight all the time and just want to see him around. So by all accounts, there's just more Andor goodness. It's just they're firing on all cylinders and doing more Andor. That's enough to get me excited. PT, share some of your general thoughts, and I'll come back just for like a quick 30 seconds of what they revealed at the end in case people are spoiler conscious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the most excited for this. I'm the most nervous only in that, like, I want this to be good. Like everything else, like I'm just sort of like, yeah, it'll be fun. I hope it's good. That'll be great. This is the one I really want to be good because the first season is so incredible and they're only going to do this second season. So if they nail this, it's going to be like, well, this is in the pantheon of all Star Wars. I feel like if it's for me, it's hard to mix thinking about the TV shows and the movies like together. But I think that if these two seasons sort of leading into Rogue One are something that can work out as well as the bookends currently are with season 1 and Rogue One, then this is up there with the original trilogy in my mind as just like some of the best Star Wars. So I do really want it to be good. It's had I won't call them bumps because that's not fair, especially in the context of the real bumps that always happen around Star Wars productions. But it was initially going to be initially announced like this is going to be a 5-season show, which is going to be a season per in-universe year. But then Tony Gilroy was like, actually, years 2 through 5 are just going to be one season. And that just got me nervous that like, is this because they decided creatively this is the best way to tell this story? Or is Tony Gilroy looking at the next decade of his life and being like, I'll do it one more time. And that's it. And then once they actually got filming, there were the strikes and they had to stop. But then they were like the writer's strike happened first, but then they kept filming for a while. So there's always the possibility there have been TV shows and movies that have been created during times of strikes like this that end up being a little shortchanged. So it doesn't sound like anyone's saying that would happen, but I've just been nervous about all that. And so, to hear that the first footage looked good, I mean, of course they know how to put together a sizzle reel, but I'm excited about this one, but I'm also the most nervous about this because I feel like
the bar is
the
so
stakes
high.
are higher.
Yeah.
In an interview, Diego Luna said that each year is 3 episodes, which I think means that the pacing actually will be very similar. There will be time jumps, which isn't in the first season, but it will be very similar to the structure and pacing of the first season because it was sort of like in 3 episode chunks. You know what I mean? Like each like little story happened in 3 episodes, and there were 12 total, which sounds like they're doing again. So there's that. That's hopeful. But I agree. The one thing that will mess this up is the prequel factor, and that it has to so neatly get us to Rogue One. And just other people have mishandled that in the past. I have more faith in this creative team than some others, maybe. Like their track record is strong, but at the same time, issues of we did our review of Furiosa, there were issues, and they are largely because it has to the story is forcing it in a certain way because it's a prequel, right? So
Mhm.
that's my only concern, is that in trying to link up now, because we didn't have to do that in season 1, right? We were far enough away from Rogue One that it was just telling its own story kind of. And so my worry is that if the closer we get to Rogue One, is it going to get stickier in terms of how it tells the story?
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see. I don't know.
My the call I'm gonna make right now is the people who are not really into Star Wars, or are, you know, they're maybe they're the critics or just sort of general audience people who don't always dip into these shows. Maybe they watched a little bit of The Mandalorian, but for the most part, you know, they'll go see movies when they come out, but whatever, who did get into Andor as prestige TV are not going to like this. Like, there's almost no way they're going to like this season, because they're going to come back because they're like, I remember this first season, it was actually good because it wasn't that Star Wars, and it's going to be more Star Warsy just because it's going to be, even if it's only within its own little bubble linking to Rogue One, it's going to have that feel of the tendrils of the wider narrative, and more characters that existed before are going to be roped in, and that people are going to be, those people are going to be let down. And then I don't think the people who didn't like the first season of Andor, which I don't know, but they didn't like it because it didn't feel like Star Wars to them, it's not going to feel Star Wars enough to get them excited. So there's going to be that sort of energy out there, but whatever, I don't care. I just hope it's really good, but I want
But
to
then
call that.
then they have Skeleton Crew. Like I feel
Yeah,
like
right.
this slate that we're talking about of upcoming stuff is actually pretty well balanced in that way, because it's like, well, if Andor is too dark and not fun and adventure-y enough, then you have Skeleton Crew, which is all that, it seems like. So I don't know, something for everybody, hopefully.
well, and PT, as toy community ambassador, I will rely on you to confirm this, but I believe the still they showed at the panel, so like if you see a picture of Diego Luna on stage, behind him is a picture of Cassian that also just went up for pre-order as a Black Series
Correct.
yesterday, and it's him in his outfit from Andor and the opening scene of Rogue One. So it could be that we literally see him walking like
Wow.
down a hall, and we'll pick up, you know, in Rogue One at the end of that hall.
I do think that, you know, maybe again we gave a spoiler warning early on. I do think that Diego Luna, in, I don't know if it was on the panel or was in an interview, said that like this is going to end with like him on that planet for that scene. What, you know,
Oh, so
like
like we find
maybe,
out why he is killing the guy
right,
that we
like
see him
what
kill.
that is, and it's going to be like,
Oh, that's cool.
you can finish the end of Andor season 2 and immediately throw on Rogue One and be like, yep, almost like no time has passed. Even more so than Rogue One leading into A New Hope, which like feels like a couple of hours might go by. This is going to be like minutes to seconds.
All right, and so just to hit the skip 30 if you don't want to know what was revealed in the footage. The footage had lots of great action. It had Melshi back, which I was very excited to see because I loved when Melshi showed up. Most importantly, confirmed Alan Tudyk back as K2SO, and he's been talking widely on the internet since, so that's not too much of a spoiler. And then the news item that blew up a text thread I was on with two friends who are currently not speaking to each other is that director Krennic is back. Because they had not previously confirmed anywhere that Ben Mendelsohn was returning as Krennic until they showed this footage. And it has a line of something like, and new enemies, and it flashes to him looking stern in a corridor.
Amazing.
And somebody in a text thread sent it like, hey, I saw a still. Do you want to see a picture of him in this new movie? And the other friend was like, I didn't know he was in the show. Thanks a lot. And now they're angry at each other. So they'll work through it. But yeah, it's you got to watch the spoiler line in friendships. That's just modern life, right? So, but nothing in the footage at all made me think it won't be very prequel-y or that it won't be really fun. So I was excited coming out of the footage.
Love it. I hope your friends heal.
I don't. No, I hope they do.
I was gonna say, do we need a new segment where we just track this beef between these two people? All right, so I think it's finally time to get to the Acolyte. We could get sidetracked and talk about other random Star Wars all day, but we are here to review season 1, or season of the Acolyte. We will see, because noticeably, I guess this is our segue, because we'll finally talk about it now. The one thing that didn't get announced at D23, alongside all the stuff we just spent like 25 minutes talking about, season 2 of the Acolyte did not get announced. Should we read into that at all? Is that curtains for this show? And then we can get into our general short take.
What I would say is that there's two things that weren't announced, and it was season 2 of the Acolyte. They also didn't announce a new animated show in a post Bad Batch world, which gives me more hope that they're maybe waiting for.
They're just saving it.
Yeah, like there's not Comic-Con, that already happened, but they're waiting for another announcement thing that they'll do at some point down the road. For something, because they've been pretty strong in the last few years from I think 2020 onward of having an animated season between the final season of the Clone Wars and then the 3 seasons of the Bad Batch each year on Disney Plus. I would be very surprised if they don't have that and have something ready to go. So there's some hope there. I also, I guess we can discuss, there was, it was some rough sailing for the vibes of the general reaction for the Acolyte, because the people who wanted to dislike it were very loud, which again is not uncommon in recent years in Star Wars. But I wonder if there was, even if it is possibly still on the plan, still on the agenda, still something that they're looking forward to do, if they're like, it's gonna break the vibes to go talk about the Acolyte when we have all these things that currently everyone's excited for it. People are, again, 98% of people love Andor. 98% of people would be excited for a Mandalorian movie. We'll return to that, and we have this other new show. Let's not bring up the thing that maybe has at least louder voices that are going to be grumbling about it. So they might be waiting for different context, but if that's true, that also makes it less likely that they would actually do a second season, which is, as we will discuss, would be a bummer.
I'm going to put one negative on the board, which is Manny Jacinto gave a really splashy panel where they had him out at the pavilion and talked all about his experience, and they showed never before seen concept art for his character and all that. Sure seems like that would have been a moment where he could, even at the end of the Filoni movie press release, there was like, oh yeah, and Ahsoka season 2 is still happening. You could have just given him going and I'm training again or something like that, a little tip. And there was nothing. I believe he gave the same line Leslie Headland said, which is, I have not heard anything yet about season 2. But on the other side, I will just say, I do think Marvel and Star Wars have learned, if you announce things really early when they're unstable and then they fall apart, you look bad. But if you wait until they're very certain and you can share footage, people will get excited. I mean, I've never myself gone back to that infamous investor call where half the projects then disappeared, but that's the problem when you start announcing things 5-6 years in advance. Things fall apart in Hollywood all the time. So I have hope that it may not be set in stone yet, but they will get to it. Acolyte toys just appeared in my Target this week, and that got me excited. There's Acolyte books that got announced at San Diego Comic-Con. Now, all those decisions happen long before you decide if there's season 2, but if this was really so bad and they wanted to erase it, then they wouldn't announce a set of books next year about it, right? We've had a Mandalorian book about Cara Dune completely scrapped after it was already written. So it happens. So it seems to me there's still hope out there. But Jen, because you never get to go first, let's just kind of start with our short takes on The Acolyte, a season of Star Wars television. How'd you feel about it?
Am generally very positive. So we've had a few weeks to kind of sit with it, right? And I didn't do a full rewatch of the whole season, though that's sort of what I was hoping to do before we recorded this. I did go back and watch the first 3 episodes. And let me tell you, they hit so differently once you know the whole story. And sort of the way that I'm going to and then maybe this is dipping into rhetorical situation prematurely, but first day of class, I usually start with a story that's written by Patrick Rothfuss, who's the, George R. R. Martin Jr. in the sense that he has a fantasy trilogy he hasn't finished.
Come on, just get the dang book out.
I
Yeah,
know,
go
right?
on, go on.
But this was the book that I usually share with my class is called the Adventures of the Princess and Mr. Whiffles, which is a book that he did for charity many years ago. That sort of looks like it walks like a children's book, quacks like a children's book. You know what I mean? Like it looks like an illustrated picture book, and it is like the content of it is actually very dark, and you've kind of figured that out in the like last third of it. And so I always have a fun time sharing this with students because like I lull them into a sense of security that I'm like, they're like, why are we starting a college class with a children's book? This is weird. And then they just like have that moment where they're like, what is this? And this is a long way to make my point, but the reason I show that to them is like when you go back and read it again, so many things are quote unquote hiding in plain sight. Like there were so many cues of like what this actually was that because we had expectations about what we wanted to see or we thought it was a certain genre, the other cues are kind of blinding us to what's really there. And I feel like that's sort of what happened when I went back and rewatched the first 3 episodes of The Acolyte. Was suddenly I'm like, this seems so much more well planned and so much smarter and so much more intricately plotted. Everything has meaning. Like everything is very clearly chosen to work towards what we actually get at the end. That I just had like actually a whole new respect for the show, because I think after the season finale initially, like when the show was airing, I really liked a lot of it, but was kind of like, that was weird. Like that was a weird way to structure a show. Like, why did certain characters do certain things, right? Like, and like, how much am I actually engaged with the sort of twists that the show offers? But I appreciated all of that way more, and it seems much more kind of like well constructed upon a rewatch. Whether or not that is good or bad, I think we could debate. But that was that's sort of where I'm at. Is like I actually like the show more now now that a little bit of time has passed. And that's not to say I didn't like it to begin with. I did. But how about you two?
Well, I like what you are saying because I also was hoping to do a rewatch of the whole series, but I didn't get started on it. But what you are saying is what I had hoped would be the feeling of going back to those first few episodes, and watching the whole thing as one piece, because I think I was very into the show. I like the show. Currently, after one watch, I mean, there's some episodes I watched a couple times on a week-to-week basis, but I haven't gone back to do the whole thing. My thinking was that it had some core flaws that are we can get into, we can discuss. But there were so many things that I really liked that were, so I'm much more positive than negative about it. However, those flaws seem pretty prominent, but I wondered if those flaws are in the show as it exists as a season of television, or are they flaws that exist in the ways in which we watch these shows, which is obsessing over the details, maybe watching it 2 or 3 times in the week that it comes out, and then talking about, reading about, hearing about the speculation of what does it all mean. And then when things don't go the way that we've all sort of speculated about, we're like, well, this is bad because it didn't do what it was supposed to do, because we had all cracked it. And it's like, well, that's not what it was aiming to do. So yeah, in a way, it's sort of like, I like this show. There's the things that I like about it are just crazy strong, and I'm really glad that they did it. The things that maybe I had the biggest bumps up against made me wonder if it's less about the show and more about us as engaged fans.
Yeah, and that's the lesson that I teach with my students on that first day is like conventions and expectations are so powerful that you see what you want to see and miss other things. And so I think for me personally, when we went to the premiere, which was an amazing experience, right? To see those first 2 episodes in a theater, I was really hung up on, this is supposed to be a noir kind of serial killer mystery thriller, right? Like I had all these genres floating in my head that the show had been pitched as, and I was too hung up on that, and then didn't see what it was actually trying to do. But yeah, I'm gonna let Greg jump in. I'm talking too much.
So last May 2023, or maybe it was April, was Star Wars Celebration Europe in London, and I did not attend, but I obsessively watched the live stream. And Leslie Headland gave their big splashy presentation, and they revealed Jedi Master Kelnaka, and then she went to the Star Wars live show stage. And in the middle of her comments, she paused and she said, "You all don't understand. Star Wars books in the 90s saved me. I love them so much." And from that moment on, I was sold on this show, right? It could have just been a take this sucker as a place card for like 6 episodes, and I would have taken it and said it was the best Star Wars show, because this was created by somebody who truly loves Star Wars in the way you're supposed to love Star Wars, which is you should challenge it and push against it and be pushed back by it, and infuse it with all the things that are fun and wonderful, but also like understand it can be really stupid at times, right? And that you should have goofy stuff you should have a weird tracker who can smell Jedi in the middle of your very dark side forest and so on. And so I share that little bit about her because to me, Leslie Headland is my exact Star Wars generation, which is somebody who came up on the books between the trilogies. And so much of this speaks to me. Now, the kind of gap I perceive, I like PT's articulation of how we watch it as fans versus what it is. I also just want to throw marketing into the mix of that. And Jen, your comments got close to that too, which this to me was billed as, get ready, High Republic fans. It's a High Republic show and it's a mystery. And I don't think either of those served it. I think there are reasons you didn't sell it the way you wanted to sell it. But if I were slightly transitioning into recommendation algorithm to tell people what this is a Star Wars from the dark side. And get ready to see how the dark side understands itself and how the dark side progresses. And that isn't exactly perfect, but I'm a huge High Republic fan. I believe the biggest of the three of us. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's one character who came over, technically 2 characters who came over because we saw somebody towards the end of the show that were from the High Republic, but they weren't. The character who mainly came over wasn't very much like her book self because she's 200 years older. So or 100 years older. But I don't think this really spoke to the High Republic part of my fandom. I also agree with Jen. It wasn't really a procedural mystery type thing. I would have just sold this as a great new adventure show set in Star Wars before all the events that we know about and left it at that. But I left this show on a big high. Returning to it for today's conversation, I was realizing I haven't thought about it a ton since, but I don't think that that's necessarily a ding against it. I have revisited Andor a few times, as my earlier comments may have betrayed. I have visited Kenobi more times than is healthy to admit. Will I revisit Acolyte? Absolutely. It hasn't yet. It's kind of cooled in that month, and it's summer and there's a lot going on. I haven't thought nothing. If this were January, maybe I would have just sat and thought about it for a month.
The big thing I could tell you when you go rewatch it is like it flies. Like it there's so much that happens in every episode. In a way that I did not remember. I was like, whoa, we're already like this already happened. So yeah, I don't know. The other thing I'll add to what you're saying is that, yeah, I don't think it's not a procedural, even though it's interesting because it borrows a lot of the language of the procedural, both visual and verbal. Because like they use the phrase like unidentified force user. Like there's a lot of like weird like procedural stuff that's in there, but the core story is, I think, this perception reversal. And there's a line that Soul has in, I don't remember, I think it's it might even be episode 1. It's his intro episode where he's like teaching all the I see fire from the trailers. That part. He's saying to the younglings like, nothing, your eyes will deceive you, nothing is what it seems. And I feel like that actually, to me, like when I first watched it, didn't register as very meaningful necessarily. I'm like, oh, that's like just Jedi talk, like, you know what I mean? Like it's just the thing you tell you Jedi younglings. But when I went back this time, it actually unlocks a ton about what the show is trying to do, because the whole plot structure is you think May is the dark side villain, but then by the end it's Osha, right? And all along she was actually the dark sider of the two of them, and they just were kind of like, they thought they were adopting roles that didn't really belong to them. And when you watch that flashback episode 3, Destiny, I think is what the name is, Osha now seems super shady. You know what I mean? Like she's the like, and May now is coded as like, when you know what happens at the end, like May now seems like, oh, she was just trying to like do what she was supposed to do and like follow her culture and follow like her, like, you know what I mean? And Osha is the one who seems more erratic and kind of like flying off the handle. It's very interesting. Because, and so again, it's my thing now is like, everything was already there. Everything's hiding in plain sight. And the big thrust of the show and what it's trying to do is to sort of make you realize, oh, everything you assumed about all of these characters and about the Jedi and about the Sith might be wrong, and you might be like question your own assumptions, kind of thing. Which, as like a, you know, a project, intellectual project for a TV show, is very interesting.
I like that. It also makes me feel like there might be things that folks were tagging as inconsistent or weird in the storytelling might come across as being more deliberate choices, intentionally leading you down a certain path, or at least giving you the clues that where they're going to end up, while still trying to keep you, distracted in another spot.
And to go to what Greg said really quick, and then because I don't think we're gonna come back to this point again. But even Vernestra doesn't seem as kind of harsh and sort of like, you know what I mean? Like there's a scene where she's like talking to Soul, and now that you know what he's hiding, his interrupting her is like, you know what I mean? It's like totally flipped, because I feel like people's reception of her as a character initially was like, oh, she's kind of like either like at best a bureaucrat, and at worst like a secret villain, you know what I mean? Like there were all these kind of negative assumptions being associated with her. But it's interesting that, again, I only watched the first 3 episodes. I didn't watch the whole season, so maybe it will change by the time I get back to the end. But like, she even seemed more reasonable. And Soul was like the one who's like, no, we like Des, you can like, now his caring reads as desperation to hide what he did and stuff like it's super interesting. But yeah, I'm gonna stop talking for a while.
No, you shouldn't. You should keep talking. The thing that I want to pick up out of what Craig said, which belongs in the short take, because I kind of yada it over, like, well, the things that I liked. One of the things I think was so important about this was just the feeling of freedom from the Skywalker saga, from the 1 through 9 movies that have existed and have really bookended our entire experience on the screen. So all the animated stuff. I mean, maybe there's some Tales of the Jedi that existed, like crept a little bit before Phantom Menace, but for the most part, everything we've seen has been within the confines of those movies. And so jumping back, even if I think you're also right, Greg, that this was weird to bill this as the High Republic show, when the point of the High Republic was just like, this is when things were good, and now we're at the sort of transition point away from that era. It feels like we're in the sort of, I don't know, some hazy zone, a post High Republic, pre Rise of the Empire, pre taxation wars. I don't know what exactly the era would be for the Phantom Menace, but yeah, where things are already getting rough for the Jedi as an institution. But it was so good, and like that played out in all these characters being on the board as people who could go evil, could just like be like, I'm going off to retirement, I could get killed, like we don't know, as opposed to watching something where it's like, well, I know where, you know, a third to 2/3 of the characters are going to end up because I've already seen a thing that shows them, you know, that was made 15 years ago. So I'm not that worried about, you know, it's more about seeing the details of what happens. I don't really, it's not really a mystery to me what's going to unfold with them. And, you know, that was really refreshing. And it was really nice to sort of be free from some of those expectations and restrictions. And I think that was, I wouldn't say clear, but that was the hope going in, that it was going to do this. And I was very happy that is what happened. And that was a really positive experience. I hope we get more of that, where things are more disconnected and just exploring a different part of this wide tapestry of this fictional universe or galaxy.
Maybe this is a good way to kind of segue into what were some of our favorite things about the show, because we're already sort of there. You know, we can. I want this to sort of be a like free form conversation. We don't have to go down the line or anything like that. But like, any favorite moments, favorite characters, like lightsaber duels, like anything that you want to kind of give a shout out to that you really liked about the show.
Saul. It's my list starts and ends there. No, it doesn't end there. I like, but if you're asking what's at the top of the list, it's the new character of Master Saul. I thought this was an incredible character. Lee Jung-jae from Squid Game, I guess. I'd never watched Squid Game. So, and he approached this, he said he thought of Qui-Gon as his inspiration. And however people are feeling about The Phantom Menace in the 25th anniversary year, I hear very few complaints about Liam Neeson. I think his character is respected, and that character has grown in fan estimation, and to have somebody kind of bring that same spirit to a Jedi was great. And then to have that character be flawed, right? And I mean, the fact that he deeply tried to do what was right and failed to do so kind of in spectacular ways is just like, that's classic mythology to me, right? I mean, I guess that's literally Oedipus, right? Where you try to prevent the bad things from happening and then the bad things happen. And so, his character was great, and there were so many little moments. I think a lot of the Star Wars pundit class has pointed out the way he would kneel down and talk to the girls, or to even when they were adults, I think. And just his presence was so wonderful, to say nothing of the way he danced with a lightsaber. To me, that is one of the greatest new Star Wars characters. I am trying so hard to buy fewer toys and to like maybe be able to send my kids to college. But I can see myself making a little soul shelf, because I just thought it was fantastic.
They can learn from the toys. Like the toys can be their teachers.
Or no, you buy the toys now, and then they go up in value.
And I can sell them to pay for the college. Yeah. Or I'll die.
At least that's what you tell yourself,
right?
Yeah, so that you can buy them and not do that.
Yeah,
that's probably what's actually going to happen.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Kamir, Manny Jacinto's character, the nominal bad guy, the Sith / not Sith, wants to avoid the that label. I think is to me the other clear character in addition to Saul that is the standout here. And every time he appeared in whatever sort of form or guise that he put on, which was kind of different each episode, each time that he showed up, it was always sort of like, oh, you know, he's the pharmacy guy, the sort of like doofus character that's like, no, he's the you know, scary big bad villain guy, and then he's the seducer to the dark side for Osha. And then, you know, he's a little bit more of the hurt former apprentice in that last episode, where I mean, he doesn't really confront his old master, but is, you know, knows she's around and is worried about that. I mean, it's just an incredible performance, a really engaging character, and if we follow with the idea of this is a show that's talking about the Force and the Star Wars universe from a more dark side perspective, or being more sympathetic to how do you get to the dark side than we had even in the story of Anakin falling, then he's a crucial part of that. And I think that he does really present it in a way that is like so logical and also just not evil. Like there's not a we see a Darth Plagueis chilling in a cave, peeking out at one point.
Not chilling, creeping.
He's creeping, and watching things. So there's a power behind the power. Though having not read the Darth Plagueis book, apologies, Greg. I do feel like from what we know just on the screen, having heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, it never feels like he's greedy in that he wants to live forever and he wants to maintain life, but isn't necessarily out to hurt people. And it never feels like Kamir, as a dark side user, is out to do, necessarily do things that are hurting people. Maybe he wants a little revenge on stuff that happened to him, and he does lay waste to a ton of Jedi. But it doesn't come across as just sort of like, I'm looking for control of the whole galaxy so much. Like the motivations feel more honest in the same way that you understand where Soul's coming from, and he has his own tragic fall. And I think Chimera is similar in terms of, well, I had this bad experience and I'm embracing myself. And I think that outside the context of the very clearly established light side, dark side of the Star Wars universe, there's a lot of life coaching out there that would have a very similar of just like, you need to take care of yourself. You gotta, you need to put yourself, make yourself the priority, and follow your dreams, follow your heart, etc. That this totally is aligned with. So I think that was really interesting, and so and obviously the performance, Manny Jacinto is just killing it, knocking it out of the park in all aspects. And especially the physical performance, not just looking jacked and handsome and gorgeous, but also incredible stunt work when he was doing the fighting.
Yeah, I would say that when Ahsoka aired, I believe I said at one point, some of, not all, but some of the lightsaber duels in that series are among the best I've ever seen in Star Wars. This blows that out of the water to me. Like, it's a little bit more stylized, so maybe it's not fair to compare them. And they're going for very different looks. Like, Ahsoka is much more in the samurai tradition. And so inevitably the choreography is going to be a bit different. But just the intricacy of every time there was a fight, it really kind of like just blew me away. And I can't think of one where I was like, you know what I mean? Like they were all really good. And yeah, I would say that like both Manny... is it Jacinto or Jacinto we're saying? Because I'm hearing both.
Oh, I realize I don't know. I think whatever I was saying was just in my head. I don't know.
Now I'm confused.
I think I've heard it mainly with the J. Myself,
okay.
So, but apologies.
Right, but who knows? And that's very Star Wars, right? To have two different pronunciations be totally fine and everyone... But both he and Lee Jung-jae, I feel like their stunt work was just like next level, and they're like that final duel between the two of them is just like I want to go. The reason I was like I gotta get through this rewatch is because I really wanted to get back to that.
I was just gonna say there's a really funny clip from Celebration Europe where the actor Charlie Barnett, who plays Yord, Daphne Keane, who plays Jecki, and Manny Jacinto are all being interviewed. And the two Jedi there talk about how hard they had to train. And Charlie Barnett turns to Manny Jacinto, is like, well, and you were like the master. And Manny Jacinto's like, I mean, I only got to watch because I just had a blaster. I'm not. And it's like the three of them, it's hilarious because they know they just really screwed up and like the Disney sniper is going to take them out. But, it is clear that Manny Jacinto was doing a lot of lying because there are more clips like that where he's like, oh, I didn't really get to participate with everybody doing the training, and clearly worked incredibly hard to do that.
Which potentially recontextualizes him at D23 saying he's heard nothing about season 2.
True. He's a good liar.
The man's a liar. We cannot believe him.
This is like Andrew Garfield, No Way Home level lying.
Ewan McGregor for 6 years being like,
that's true.
Never talk to me. I don't know.
Well, I did not make time for an Acolyte rewatch, but I have been rewatching The Good Place just because that's what I do in my free time. And the distance between Jason Mendoza on Good Place and Chimere
crazy,
is
right?
unbelievable. And I hope his next step is Acolyte season 2, but he's just been launched into the stratosphere with this amazing performance.
Because even critics and podcasters that I've heard be very critical of the show, the universal praise is for him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I often heard, well, I'm not into what the show is, but oh boy, Manny Jacinto is amazing, right? Like, and that seemed to be the most consensus was surrounding his performance. Yeah. And like, he's really up there now for me in terms of most interesting villains. One of my reviews of one of the episodes on the longtake.substack.com, I think extensively talked about, like, I'm not usually a dark side villain type person, but like it's Chimere and animated Darth Maul. Like, that's those are my guys. Like, now. But yeah. Did I do a shout out? I don't remember now.
No, your turn for saying you like.
Okay. Oh, you took a lot of the good ones though. I would say, yeah, because we've talked about so much. We've talked about the lightsaber fights. We've talked about the standout performances. I would actually just add Daphne Keane in there too. You know, maybe I'm still riding the high of X-23 from Deadpool and Wolverine, but like, she's so good. And yeah, the main tragedy of the show is that so many of the characters that I really liked are now dead. So whenever, like, in theory, we shouldn't see them again. But this is Star Wars, so who knows? Actually,
they will be in books. Daphne or Jackie is confirmed
right.
as the lead in one of the books.
Oh, that's good. So yeah, who knows? We could get like a prequel to this that is like her. I would watch a whole show of just her coming up in the Jedi Order sort of thing. Because honestly, she seems like the most competent person on the show. A character, I would say. But okay, I'm gonna give a weird shout out then, kind of like I'm now riffing into my actual answer. So this is a weird thing, and no one else probably appreciates this. But for me, early on in the series, there's these moments of kind of like weird banter that feel very much like TV shows of a certain era. And to loop this to another film that we reviewed, I Saw the TV Glow. There's definitely like a sort of like, and I'm thinking in particular of Jackie and Yord. Like, there's a bunch of moments between those two characters where from the start, when Jackie's like, is Yord coming? And Soul's like, what's wrong with Yord? It's just Yord, right? Like that kind of thing, to Jackie sort of shutting down Yord's elaborate kind of convoluted plan, and she's like, why don't we just send Osha in there? Right? Like, wouldn't that be a lot simpler and more direct, right? So there's a bunch of stuff like that to me really felt like the energy of a lot of TV shows that I used to watch and like as a kid. That just feel like adventure TV shows, if that makes sense. So, which, considering all the other stuff we've talked about, the fact that it was able to also sneak that in there, I feel like is pretty good.
I think that's a good point. You know, kind of the Whedon-y sense of humor that then Marvel turned into kind of the whole Avengers kind of all
quippy thing,
like that. Like, I think has been played out a little bit, but you're right that there's a kind of a smallness to it that to me made it effective here. And I talk about this a lot on my Wheel of Time podcast. Like, you have to remember that teenagers are teenagers. And I feel like because you're pointing to Yord and Jackie, it's like, yeah, they shouldn't be these weird Jedi robot kids. They should be actual 18-year-olds that, you know, or younger than that in the case of Jackie. I think Jackie's only 16. But
16, yeah.
But they should, you know, Anakin never, we kind of skipped that age of Anakin, or it was just whining. And so to remember that these are young people and that they kind of bicker with each other, I think works really well. And, you know, I want to maybe throw it back to both of you with the question of, I'm curious exactly what they wanted the relationship between Jackie and Osha to read as, because I've seen a lot of people read it as romantic interest. I've also seen people kind of read it as just friendship, or now I sound like every late thing, like, no, your aunts are just roommates. What are you talking about? But like, is it meant to be romantic? Is it meant to be like a mentor almost? Like, you know, Jackie is clearly not like in love with Saul's leadership and mentorship, so maybe was looking for who else she could follow. But I think it's a really interesting one, because I feel like it didn't have enough screen time to fully get defined, and that's fine. It wasn't the point of the show, but there were a few lines kind of sprinkled throughout that felt like they wanted it to read as something else.
I believe that the actress Daphne Keane said she played it like a crush, like that she had a crush on Osha, or had maybe crushes underselling it, like had romantic feelings, and that this was flirting, and she was, you know, developing a real connection in that sense. I don't know. I don't think that's canon. I don't think they, you know, and that's not just because I don't trust Disney to commit to that. Despite all the accusations of them being a part of the woke mob, I think Disney loves to not have to worry about that. But yeah, I think that there's certainly a feeling of that a Jackie seeing something that is outside of her normal experience. And you know, that's partly, you know, sort of the speaking to the insularity of the Jedi, and sort of, you know, the problems that will come to a head in the prequel movies that are already forming here, of, you know, this is the calcification of the Jedi Order has already begun, and it feels a lot like they don't really communicate like with people outside, apart from sort of showing up as authority figures, issuing statements and orders, and then returning to their community. And so she gets a chance to sort of have this connection with someone who had time there but also lived outside, and she seems really intrigued by that. And it feels like it you know, mostly exists as a contrast to how she treats Yord, who is the person that's never left, who's very committed to it and very rule following. And so she's very dismissive of him as a stick in the mud. And then she's like, well, this person's cool though, and I like this. And you know, my master is really like, you know, has attachments, whether he admits it or not,
You
to
can say
her.
obsessed.
Yeah, like he's being a little weird.
We've
about
seen
this.
the whole
So
show. I think
on?
you can say that now.
Yes, and so that, you know, on it could just exist on that level, but I think it's not unintentional that it can be read as kind of, you know, queer coded in terms of their potential relationship.
And I think their main conversation before the big battle against Chimera, in which Jackie dies, it does feel a lot like what could have been, right? Because the way they talk about it is like, well, like, and this is how, you know, we should have known that one of them, but probably Jackie, was going to die based on this conversation in retrospect. But like, they are talking about like, well, like when this is all over, we'll go grab a drink and we'll like swap stories about Master Soul, right? Like, so I do feel like the reason that romantic tension is there for people to pick up on is because it heightens sort of the loss, right? Like, of like, you know, this is another path that's presented here that is not going to be followed. And how sad, because it seems nice. But yeah. The other shout out I wanted to give, which I cannot believe I didn't think of this immediately, is witches. Love me some Star Wars witches. So the House of R, so Joanna Robinson and Mallory Rubin, I didn't get through all of their coverage of the Acolyte, but they
really?
came up with this. They came. I mean,
because time is linear and you didn't have enough hours. Yeah.
Yes. I didn't have my time turner or whatever.
The folks out there that complain about the length of episodes of the Long Take Review need to understand that we are also listeners of the 3 hour and 45-minute podcast, The House of R, that will frequently.
They came up with a catchphrase, "Which stuff go?" Because there's also, if you're watching House of the Dragon, there's a little bit of witch stuff in there too, and so the shows were overlapping. So yeah, I just really like how we're pushing the boundaries of Star Wars lore, right? It would have been really easy for them to be like, oh, witches, Night Sisters, right? To just make them Night Sisters, but to make them so different and to introduce the thread and all, I thought all that stuff was super cool.
That's one of the things that felt the most High Republic-y to me. If people out there are curious, the 3 phases of the High Republic, the second one actually goes back in time. They structured it like the 3 trilogies, so you start in the middle, go back to the beginning, and then finish it out. And when they went back in time, the central event is called the Convocation of the Force, which is on the planet Jeddah from Rogue One. I'm such a nerd. Sorry. When even you guys glaze over.
I should wait. Quick aside for our listeners: when the 3 of us are talking about this show in the context of this podcast, the Long Take Review, with one eye always on the Oscar race, we are actively, I've noticed this, we are actively talking about Star Wars in a little bit different way than we would if we were off mic. I'm just putting that out there, that we are understanding that everyone listening to the show might not be as granular about the details. Yes. So just
strong
know
audience awareness approach to being like.
So that said, Greg, let it rip.
A long time ago. No.
It is a period of civil war. So the second phase of the High Republic is focused. It's not about this, but it happens around this event called the Convocation of the Force, which is a meeting on Jeddah of essentially all the different Force users in the galaxy. And the creators really went out there and created all these very different groups that understand the Force differently. And it's so fascinating to think about. And it really is just analogous to, like, here on Earth, we have all these different religions, many of which believe in like a central God figure, but they interpret everything totally differently. And that's a lot of what, the Convocation is about. And so the main group in that phase of the High Republic is called the Path of the Open Hand, who actually, it's kind of like believing strongly in predestination here, but they believe in the Force, but they think anybody who uses the Force doesn't understand that if they use it to save a life here, there's going to be a death somewhere else. Like, you are choosing and shouldn't be. You should let the will of the Force be the will of the Force. And so are kind of anti-Jedi in that way. And so when you have this group of witches that are not the Dathomiri witches, but also seem to understand the Force with their own vocabulary and their own rules, it felt close to the Path of the Open Hand, but not that. There's a central mother figure to the path. So when trailers came out, people thought, oh, maybe this is an early version, but it seems totally separate. But it really works because it makes so much sense. And it's one of those touches here on the show that helps make the galaxy bigger. Like PT was saying, we're not leading into the Skywalkers, so why not introduce this whole new group? And like, it's not going to be so simple that it's like a Dathomiri witch. It's going to be something totally new and different, and we can have lots of questions about them. And then we'll just leave those questions out there. And that is the real lesson of this movie called Star Wars: A New Hope from 1977. And while we've spent 40 years kind of filling in all the little crevices and every line and species name from that movie, it works best when you get to open it up and discover something new. So I'm here for the witches as well, even though I would not count myself as like I don't have my Halloween decorations up yet. I'm not in that section of Home Depot starting in August, right? Like some people are, and no shame on anybody who is. I'm not a Halloween spooky season person, but I think it totally works in Star Wars, and it was really exciting.
Yeah, I co-sign all of that. I think that this maybe goes back to what I was thinking about, of like, is part of the problem, it's part of the flaws of the show, not the show, but how we watch it. And I'm thinking, personally, I'm not trying to necessarily denigrate anyone else, but of like, well, how does this connect? And what's the, like, where are these witches in relation to these other witches? And what's the backstory there? And, it's a sort of like watching, and so, for some people, this is a debilitating approach to it. But I still fall into it, of the sort of Wikipedia editing, like thinking about just like, how does this tie into everything else? When sometimes, like, going back to the original movie, it's just sort of like, it's just a weird thing that exists in this world, like, and it's a cool new little like nub of the galaxy that like you don't need to know anything else about it. Like they're there, and whatever we learned in the show is all you need to know. We don't need a comic book. We don't need a backstory. We don't need a spin-off series. It's just this cool thing that like you can wonder about, but you don't need to know more about it for this story to make sense. And I think that it's easy to get so fixated on trying to see what the connections are and being kind of programmed to think about how it ties into other parts of the wider story universe, and what that may mean for what's going to happen in the next few episodes that at the time have not come out yet, that we kind of lose, it's almost like we lose the trees for the forest. It's like the opposite of the cliche, because it's just sort of like, no, just enjoy this. Just enjoy this weird coven of witches, and they have this strange ritual, and they brand their heads somehow, and they were going to do something about them leading, and it's not really clear, but like it doesn't have to be. Like it's just that they have their thing, and the Jedi showed up and messed up their thing, and that's all you gotta know.
Do you think this is going to get us off the rails, which is not, so this is not what I was about to say, but now you're making me think of it. So this is a very selfish question to ask. Do you feel like this is the creation of Ocean May was a Plagueis assist? Because that's a lot of people are saying that. Or
a lot of people are
there's
saying.
A lot of people, yeah. Jen is in her rally mode.
Yeah. I think no one's ever asked this question before, but it's a great question, I think.
Let's clarify the question. You mean, did Darth Plagueis help create the twins?
Yes. So like, or the alternative probably would be that they just took advantage of the virgins that's on that planet, right? And then we're able to.
And I think Darth Plagueis has become aware of it and is investigating with Chimere to try to be like, well, what's the deal? Because this might be the answer to my question. This might be the thing that I'm looking for.
Right.
That's what I think it is.
And I would prefer that.
I'm excited for a potential Acolyte season 2 to maybe dig into it a little bit more, because nothing's better than when there's a new episode of TV that is just answering questions from the first season of TV. That's always very successful as a narrative endeavor.
Yeah, that's the way I want the influence to flow, is that I think, and PT, you nicely apologized to me, which I do expect from both of you all the time. But technically speaking, the Plagueis novel is not canon. So as much as we want to take from that, we should say, it all could be upended. But what we know of where Legends Plagueis was at this time, he is not yet successful in his experiments, and he should be getting closer and closer. So I really like the idea that he somehow gets wind of these Force twins, some connection through Chimere, Vernestra seems to make sense. And then is like, this is it. This is how I'm going to live forever, and I'm going to go in that direction. Because I just invoked the novel, let me also say, according to Legends, Plagueis is still alive during the Phantom Menace. So he would die somewhere in the 10 years between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, which if they, it seems to me that stuff comes over to canon unless a creator has a reason to change it. So it would be really interesting to see Plagueis become this through line back to the prequels.
And I'm sure if they change that, everyone would be very chill and calm and be like, oh, well, I guess I'll just have to change the way I think about things.
Like totally he had Mundi's age. Yeah.
Yep. You didn't. I have a CD-ROM from 2001.
Oh, man. Maybe I'll piggyback kind of a question on that. Or again, I don't know if this is a question. Then I'm going to make it a statement. It took me like 2 weeks after the season finale to realize that the strong hints that Chimere is very old are probably because he's been experimented on by Plagueis, right? Like, totally blew by me that there are many references, including Vernestra in the finale, being like, no, it can't possibly be. That was a long time ago. And that starts to give me a reason why we bring Vernestra across and we have this kind of old character established, because you want to tell some of that story. So I I think it's very possible Chimera has himself had some doses of midi-chlorians
Right.
or what have
He's
you to
had some
extend his
treatments.
life. They're
Mhm.
getting closer, but they haven't yet found the secret to eternal life.
I mean, that unknown planet is basically a spa retreat. So, like, makes sense that
I
he's just
mean,
been.
nude bathing in seawater does wonders. It's a cold plunge, right? Is
Yeah.
what he's doing. I'm from New England, so the ocean is only cold. I've heard there's warm ocean somewhere. I heard maybe it's getting warmer, but no, it's just painful.
In New England, they just
painful
call it a
cold.
plunge. That's
Yeah.
it's just a plunge.
um, again, so many digressions, but I'm not going to apologize for it anymore. There's a line when Chimera is pitching going to Kofar to May, when she gets mad at him for like, you ratted me out to the Jedi, and he's like, well, hold on. He calls Kofar a relaxing jungle planet. He uses the word relaxing. So I'm convinced now his core, one of the core features of his character is self-care. Like he's just like,
what's that like Swedish like Heige or something like that, where it's all just like cottage core and it's just like just be cozy. That's actually like his home planet is all about that, and he's just been subsumed by first the Jedi and now the dark side. But he's still like, it's just like, I mostly just want to cuddle up with a nice little holocron and read myself to sleep by a fire. Okay, here are my questions, or here's one of my questions, since apparently that's what we're doing, is we're just question round. Does do is the correct way of saying it. Do the 2 flashback episodes work as sort of parallels, like in the story? Is that structure good? Because looking back, that feels like the thing that maybe that second flashback episode, I feel like people thought a lot, like there was going to be more differences and there's going to be more insight into what was going on. And, it feels like the arc of chatter and conversation that I was having with people was that like, it was maybe some uncertainty for the first few episodes, and then that like big fight at the mid-season across episodes 4 and 5, and then 6 as a like resetting and doing things was like really interesting. People were into that, and then I think that 7th episode, the second flashback, threw a bunch of folks off, and that's to the degree that there's setting aside the people that had chosen to hate this before it came out, the people who are engaging with it, to the degree that there's some mixed reactions, I think that second flashback episode is what caused it. What do you all think about that? Do you think it worked? Do you think that there was needed to be something different? Do you think, and again, this is where it would have been great if we could have all rewatched the whole season to see how it plays different across the two, but at least Jen, I know you rewatched the first one. I don't know what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that it does enough? Do you think that as a whole, this really makes sense to have the structure this way?
So I think to me at this point, it's another case of the label hurting the show, because, and Leslie Headland did this, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's not like we foisted this label onto but the use of the word Rashomon, I think actually really hurt people's perception of those episodes, because, and I know we got some Last Duel stands on here, right? Like, so that movie is an actual Rashomon. There's 3 sections. Each one is told from the subjective perspective of a different character, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think once someone, whoever the first person that said this was a Rashomon show, right? Mm-hmm. Automatically assumed, okay, so this 3rd episode is clearly from a character that's probably Osha. Then the next one's probably from May. Then the next one after that could be from Sol, right? Everyone thought of it as like character POV, which makes sense, because that's sort of what that's like one of the foundational things of Rashomon is like it's everyone's own personal perspective and how those conflict and kind of like create a sense of truth intersubjectively, right? Sorry, that's just a very loaded word in our writing program. So I just realized I used it. Shout out to Jack Plum. So I think people's expectations, They're like, oh, so this is a Rashomon. Clearly this is what we're going to get. And then when we didn't get that, when instead we got 2 episodes that are not necessarily from a single person's perspective and therefore radically different in what we see, but sort of just shifting slightly. I mean, in my review, and obviously this is not, I think you can interpret it differently. In my review, I think I concluded that the first flashback episode is from the perspective of the Coven. The second flashback episode is generally from the perspective of the Jedi. And even that doesn't hold up 100% in every scene and every moment, right? Because I think it's a weird mix of things that are objective and subjective, right? We just see we just shift the camera slightly and see a little bit different perspective on the same events. And so I don't know. That's a long way of saying I think in general it works, but I think it was misunderstood what they were trying to do. What do you think, Greg?
As I've confessed elsewhere, I think when I hosted Force Ghost conversations, I explained that Rashomon is a thing I've never seen, but I just talk about as if I've seen it. So I really appreciate you gave us the handhold of The Last Duel, because I can confirm that this is true of Last Duel. I have not seen Rashomon. I'll get to it. It's on my canopy. It's even free, but
good movie.
Also, Tarot is the highest, most popular Letterboxd movie I haven't seen this year. So maybe I should watch Tarot instead of a classic of modern cinema. So as I understand it, Rashomon should work the way Last Jedi used it, which is that you see the same scenes acted differently, right? That the subjective nature of it is that, yes, and Ben Affleck did this beautifully in Last Duel. Man, I didn't expect to be praising Ben Affleck when I woke up this morning, but in his own plot line, he seems like the coolest guy in the world and everybody loves him, and the way he delivers his lines that are everybody's laughing at my jokes. And then when you see it from Jodie Comer's perspective, it's like Ben Affleck is the biggest jerk in the world and nobody likes him, right? And it's meant to work in that way, and I think that's where these 2 episodes didn't work. As I understand it, I haven't carefully studied every bit of the construction. It's all we did is kind of trim down the parts that the character saw. So they are seeing the same scene, but they're only seeing half of it. And the assumptions they make are built on that half versus the whole scene. So it's a little informed by that perspective, but it doesn't actually kind of function in that way. So that's all to say. I'm agreeing with you, Jen. And I think, PT, you've hit it right, which is, I think those 2 episodes are where the show is showing its work the most, right? It's I don't know the right metaphor, but when you're in somebody's beautiful home and you accidentally see the spot where you can see the nail sticking out or what have you, right? You're oh, there's a support beam right there and I'm not supposed to see that or what have you. Or maybe it's a movie set where somebody leaves the coffee cup out and you're there's the coffee cup. We're not in Westeros. They have Starbucks. And so that was that. And Little Women did it too. Little Women left a travel mug out in the 1800s. I know we love Little Women. That's masterpiece. But also they did leave a travel mug out in one shot. So I do think that because it's working so hard to make those 2 work, I think if you're not bought into the concept of the show, it falls apart right there, because there is no other reason to split those 2 flashbacks up and tell it this way other than we want to do something cool with the editing and play, right? It's it's the equivalent of a cinematographer doing a really cool, oh, I'm going to show you the game reflected in the eyeglasses instead of just the game or whatever, right? And you're I see what you're doing. And if it really works, then you're there for it. But in this case, it's it was a sweaty effort, right? And so it didn't quite add up there. And I think those small parts of construction where I started this ramble are what you're left with, because it's telling you, hey, we are constructing something really cool. And so you're the construction doesn't quite add up. And I would actually kind of color myself as disappointed in that second episode along those lines. I was still bought into the show, but I really thought the show would show me why it was so important. And what it came down to is, those people who thought they were doing good and were kind of shady about it, they thought they were doing good, but were kind of shady about it. And so it didn't fulfill any kind of mystery piece for me or really become revelatory. it was just like, hey, you know those like 5 scenes that should have been in that 3rd episode that we edited out? You can have those here. And now you understand. Congrats. And it's like, well, but like you could have just edited them into that other scene and I would have been fine. So that is a place I struggled with this show, and it's good we admit some Star Wars struggles. It's therapeutic for me, and I think, otherwise I cry into my pillow. So any more on that, or do you have any other struggles that either of you want to admit with the show?
Well,
so I just want to counterpoint.
Oh,
like
I was going to stand up, but I won't.
That second in that second flashback episode, we see that Saul murders Mother Anastasia. Like, does that justify a whole episode just to reveal that? I guess I don't know, but like to me, that alone probably was enough to be like, whoa, like this is new information. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because I do remember hearing tons of critics a lot more harshly than we are talking about right now, being like, this was exactly the same. This is repetitive, right? And so I just want to qualify what we're saying is like I wouldn't never go that far. Like I think there was enough new stuff. But I think
counterpoint to your counterpoint, because we don't want PD to talk. PT, that came out as PD. Apologies, PT to talk. I will just say I would agree with you if it was like Saul said, "I hate you. I'm slicing off your head." But because it was kind of he got startled. He didn't understand the magic. He murdered her kind of by accident. I have trouble making that same leap you're making. Go ahead, PD.
I mean, first of all, I want to say that you can be kind to the you who woke up this morning, Greg, because I think you were praising Matt Damon and not Ben Affleck. Unfortunately, you're not allowed back in Cambridge going forward, but
they're essentially the same guy.
Your dunking card has been revoked.
Oh, I'll just have to go watch 20 episodes of Voyage of the Mimi, and then I'll be back.
There you go. Part of the reason I brought it up is this is the sort of the origin of my thesis about my meta reaction to the show, which is I struggled a little bit with this second flashback episode. I agree, Jen, with what you're saying, that we did get new information. I think that what Saul was doing, or how Saul did this, the fight with Kelnaka, which again had been in like a preview thing, so we knew and that level is going to happen, but it was like, well, how exactly does that unfold? The sort of the death of everyone in the coven, and that was Jedi induced. Like we expected that, or at least we suspected it. And seeing it was something that I think was going to be important. However, I was like, but like, what about all these other questions? And I was like, but are these questions the show has raised, or are these questions that I raised from watching it? And like one of those details was the fire, which is starts outside the door. Like May locks Osha into their bedroom, and she's mad, and then she's like, she's got like a little flame. It's like, I'm gonna burn this thing, and then it becomes this big fire. And because we don't see that in the original flashback, there was all this sort of talk of like, well, of course, there's more to it than that. That's going to be something that involves the Jedi. That's something that they have a hand in. And then it got to it, and it was just like, nope, like it's just the wiring got caught and this concrete structure burned down somehow. So there's, that was a little bit like, like that. Was the show really setting that up for us, or did I have those expectations? So on that level, I think it's just kind of like we all need to sort of check ourselves in the similar way that there was that window of time where we had seen 4 episodes and everyone's like, it's got to be Manny Jacinto is the bad guy, right? Like he's the stranger who shows up, like he has to be. All the crumbs are there for that, and it was like, no, that's too obvious. It's gonna be Carrie Ann Moss. It's gonna be Vernestra. It's gonna be someone else. And then it's like, no, like the story is what it is. Like it's not. What we are overcomplicating it by trying to like find clues that aren't really there. That said, I think the problem of the execution of it is that the extra new information we got from the second flashback are the moments that aren't particularly clear. Like Saul attacks and kills the mother, but it's sort of like, why did you do that? Was it because she was like disintegrating into a cloud? Like, I don't want there to be like a bunch of exposition like, what is happening? What's this cloud? I attack. Like that would maybe feel weird, but it just like that all happens so fast that it's like, oh yeah, I guess he was scared, but I don't really know fully why he was scared. Like it feels like they could have tried to shown that in some other way. And then similarly, the Indara severing the connection with Kalnaka, I guess, kills everyone in the coven who's doing the connection. But like that's also not particularly clear, which, you know, again, like I don't want like just an exposition of like, well, you know, of course, if we ever do this mind control and there's an interruption, that would be fatal for anyone involved. You know, that would probably be very cumbersome, but it just felt like weird that the information that we were getting that was like, oh, this is the crucial thing that was made it worth a second flashback episode, are the most obtuse moments of that episode. So we ended up still having questions of like, wait, what does that mean? Or like, what exactly happened there? So, you know, that just felt like an unfortunate, you know, a mixture of intent and execution that didn't quite work out. The other thing I will note about that is, you know, it is outside of the context of the show. If someone comes back and watches this in a decade and they're not paying attention to the interviews, they don't need to know that it's been hyped up as Rashomon. But the previous episode ends with Saul securing May to a table and saying, I'm now going to tell you what happened. So it's just like, oh, great, this is going to be Saul's perspective. But then we're still cutting to what happens between young May and Osha and what happens within the coven. And it's like, well, that's not what this is then. So why was it set up that way? And I was seeing people try to process this with, well, but Osha's in the Sith helmet, so she's in the sensory deprivation tank. Maybe she's getting visions of what happened, and her memories are mixing in with Saul's, but that didn't pay off as anything when she takes off the helmet. Like she doesn't remember things or see something different. So yeah, I mean, it's just the thinking about this in terms of how successful it is, that is like the thing that brings it down for me is like, like all this stuff that's really great. And again, I think the intent is there for this to really work and come together. But there were some moments that hadn't quite been figured out by the time they made it. So that holds it back.
Are you saying that if this show were a student paper, your comments would be, I see what you're doing, and I think it's really cool and sophisticated, but you're not cueing your reader well enough so that they don't know the rules of engagement in terms of like what they're, you know, they don't, yeah.
You need to make a choice at the point of the end of episode 6. If you want to set up the reader for the next episode to be the perspective of Saul, you have to do a lot of changes to the next episode to make it the perspective of Saul. If you don't want that, you should change the end of episode 6 so it doesn't feel that way, and then maybe reconsider the, you know, separate from that, reconsider the structure of the flashbacks, because I saw some people kicking around this idea of like, what's the fan edit version of this they would make, and they're like, I don't want to change a bunch. They were thinking it would just be make this a 6 episode series where short episode 4 and then episode 5 with the big fight is just put together because it's clearly written and filmed to have been one episode, and then make the flashback the penultimate episode and not have the flashback in episode 3 and just put put a supercut of those two things together and change nothing else. And then how does that look? And what does that feel like? And I think that, like, you know, I don't know if that would be more successful. Maybe we need enough of that information about the witches and about everything else earlier on for 4, 5, and 6. What exists now is 4, 5, and 6 to make sense. But yeah, it does feel like it wasn't where it wanted to be. And again, part of that is the promise that they made, and part of that is the hope that I had of like, oh, this is going to be really cool when they do this, and then it wasn't as successful, so therefore not as cool.
Counterpoint to my counterpoint to Jen's counterpoint. I do just want to say before we leave the topic of these 2 flashback episodes, the way they wrote Jedi as colonizers and the arrogance and the ignorance written into the law enforcement was beautiful and challenged the wrong kind of Star Wars fans in exactly the right way. And I don't want to leave that subject without saying that was just so beautifully done. Like, while I have some questions still and so on, like the way Saul acted kind of on the baseline assumption that these people who are different than me are primitive and I need to get them to think the right way, and all his terrible actions flowed out of that attitude, that was pitch perfect and beautiful. So take that, Greg, who fought with Jen, who fought with Greg. You were half right.
Yeah, I will just add to that I think there's an interesting media literacy point from the collection of people who I think are maybe of a particular age who think that this show was like denigrating and desecrating the great Jedi who have never been evil in these in this, and they've never been these bad guys, and how dare they come in and say that the Jedi are just these colonizing types who come in and arrogantly pluck young people away. And it's just fascinating that folks like don't see that in the prequels and the Clone Wars, and to some degree a knock-on effect in Rebels, and even mention kind of in Obi-Wan Kenobi, that like this is a key part of the wrestling with the Jedi. Old Ben Kenobi in the original movie talks about the Jedi in this glowing way because he has this like idealistic view of what the Jedi were supposed to be and what he wanted them to be, but that's not who they were when he was a young lad in the organization, because we've seen it and they're not doing things that great and it's not working that well. And, this is merely sort of a continuation of that. But yeah, there are people who haven't seen that, and they feel like, in the same way that I think the people who really, one of the ways in which they bristled at the portrayal of Luke Skywalker, who's a main character in the original Star Wars movies, in the Last Jedi, that they see like, well, how can he talk bad about the Jedi? Like, the Jedi are great, and it's like all he's doing is summarizing the Wikipedia entries of the prequels that he read after Return of the Jedi, and he was like, wait a minute. So it's weird that people don't see the connections there, and they don't see this trend of questioning the Jedi and wondering about them. So yeah, I understand that if there's folks who came to this with knowledge of the High Republic books, or at least vaguely aware of the concept of, oh, we'll see the Jedi when they're good, when they're at the peak of their powers, and it's like, nope, like they're still kind of pieces of crap. They're still a deeply flawed organization that is approaching things poorly. Then that would be disappointing. But it's interesting to me that all that stuff that Greg was just saying as being pitch perfect, which again I agree with, is something that was strange or weird or felt like a new addition to the canon of Star Wars, when I feel like it's not. It's just a clear and obvious continuation of what has been there since George Lucas was like, well, we got to go back and show the Jedi Order in actual action and existing.
All right, so I think since we are doing this as a season review, right? We're looking at the whole season together. Where does this fit in with the other seasons of Star Wars television, right? How are we ranking it? And I think a lot of and the thing I'm curious about is like, how far down are the things, because we are ending on a more critical note, right? Like, we're trying to pick at the things that didn't totally work for us. How far down is that going to pull it on the list? I'm really curious to see. Do we want to start from, because like, what's the actual number? Is it 7?
It's 8.
Oh, it's 8. Okay, so there are 8 shows or 8 seasons of television. And do we want to start at 8 and just discuss what we'd put there and then try to form a list and see how dicey it gets?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems like it'd be more fun for the listeners as opposed to us sharing our personal rankings, because we'll be arguing more. Okay, so should I read out the options first?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's The Mandalorian Season 1, Mandalorian Season 2, The Book of Boba Fett, which is arguably The Mandalorian Season 2.5, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor Season 1, The Mandalorian Season 3, Ahsoka, and The Acolyte. So what's the worst? Like, what's the bottom of your list?
I feel like we all have to agree, right? It's got to be Book of Boba Fett. at the
Oh.
bottom?
Yeah.
No,
Oh,
I have Mando
what?
season 3. I have Mando season 3 at the bottom.
Oh,
Like,
see, I liked Mando season 3 a lot more than most people did.
See, I like
I liked all the Bo-Katan stuff, and I just like that character a lot. So, I agree that it's much weaker. Like, if I'm ranking the Mando seasons, that one's clearly at the bottom of those 3. But
this would be my case for it is the best Mandalorian character stuff after the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian are in the Book of Boba Fett. The Tusken Raider stuff in the Book of Boba Fett is better than anything in Mandalorian season 3. And then the stuff, the like gangland stuff in Book of Boba Fett is weak and pretty undercooked. So that's, I think, worse than most of Mando season 3.
The Vespa gang. Yeah.
Oh,
but
I don't mind the Vespa gang. I don't mind them, but they're not very good.
There's a lot in Book of Boba Fett, right?
Yeah,
Tashi Station and Cammy and
the train chase. The when he gets Slave 1 and just like blows up the biker gang, like that part's cool. I mean, Book of Boba Fett is not bad.
Okay, I agree, and there are definitely elements of Book of Boba Fett that I really like. But if we're thinking about it as a cohesive season of television, structurally, I feel like it's the most flawed out of all of these. Because at least Mando, like regardless of how you feel about the storyline of Mando season 3, like it had a clear arc that's recognizable, and it had a thing it was trying to do. Book of Boba Fett is like wants to be 2 different things.
Mm-hmm. I would argue it's 3 different things.
Okay,
it's
sure.
like,
Many different things,
but still,
like, you know what I mean.
I guess, yeah. Like, I guess my thinking on it is I'd rather have the thing that is 2/3 to me, 2/3 good,
I guess,
than something that is like consistently kind of mediocre.
I just feel like
maybe strong, but consistently.
If your show is called The Book of Boba Fett and people only now talk about the 2 Mando episodes, like that's not good.
So these were my 7 and 8. So I think I can go either way in terms of the direction on them, but it seems clear these are at our bottom, right?
Okay.
I do feel bad. I actually put Book of Boba Fett above Obi-Wan Kenobi, which I know is going to be a real fight here.
Oh, geez. No, we can't have that.
No. I'm fine with it being 7 and 8, and if we like want to agree, so we don't blow up with putting. No,
I think Greg and I are overruling you on this.
And Mando 3, okay.
But I do have my Mando N1 that you previously invoked.
Yes,
proudly on my shelf. So it is a great part of those Book of Boba Fett episodes.
Yeah. Remember when Mando season 3 said the cult was great? It was just like, what's great is the hardcore cult. Everything's just good about them. There's nothing to question. It's good that he's back with them.
Let's not forget that the Darksaber didn't mean anything.
Yeah. Well, no, because Sabine has to make a new Darksaber. That's where it's going to be.
I don't know.
She's the new Vizsla. Who will? Yeah, but the Darksaber was meaningless.
Yes, no, I understand that, but that hasn't happened yet. I'm talking about what actually happens in Mando season 3 with the Darksaber, which was grossly disappointing. And like, we spent more time talking about arbitrary rules about the Darksaber than we did actually like reveling at the Darksaber's greatness. Right. But
so 6 is where I lose my allegiance with Jen, or my alliance with Jen, because
you're going to put
Ahsoka at number 6.
I wouldn't do that.
I'm just going to say, for my piece, I don't think that works as a season of television. It works great as the start of a story. But even without the cliffhanger, I just thought that show did not at all understand what the most interesting things it had were, right? So Balin and his apprentice, Shin, to me are like super interesting, great additions to Star Wars. I want to learn a lot about them. They just get forgotten, right? And that is without the unfortunate passing of the actor who passed after the season came out. And I would similarly classify like, whatever has happened between Ahsoka and Sabine is super interesting. That sounds like a great episode of television. And we just skip that to this weird quasi-fight relationship moment they're in. And so those are my reasons why I would put Ahsoka very low. I can tell by the faces on Zoom that I'm going to get overruled, which is fine because I respect the rules of a 3-person project. But
I mean, it's going to get messy. This middle zone is where I think it gets messy because
Should we bump back up to the top and then work our way to the middle? 'Cause I feel like there's more agreement at the top.
That's probably a good idea. Because in my mind, there's sort of three tiers. Again, I had Mando season 3. It's sort of on its own in the bottom tier as just sort of like overall. And I had a great time with Mando season 3. I have not gone back to rewatch it, which says something because I've gone back and rewatched the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian pretty consistently. But like I had a great time with it. It's fun Star Wars. I think it's like overall not very effective. The middle tier is like has some very obvious flaws, but stuff I love mixed in as well. And then there's a top tier that to me has 3 seasons, which I think I guess we can discuss whether we agree with that. But I'll just put it out there. Number 1 is Andor season 1. Easy. I don't know what we have to say about it.
Yep. That's why I wanted to. I was like, let's at least establish that.
Prior to going on air, we asked if this was going to be a list from our head or our hearts. PT said he only thinks with his heart. Jen said, I only think with my head. No, you didn't say that. But Andor.
I just said I would need 2 different lists.
Andor to
like
me,
if I'm going with my heart, Ahsoka is number 1 probably.
Yeah,
which I have said on other podcasts.
Andor to me is just the merger of head and heart. Like it is both the most beautifully constructed. It is the Empire Strikes Back if you're ranking the OT. But I also in rewatching it, nothing gets me to pump my fist harder than some of those speeches.
One way out,
particularly. Well, yes, but also Marva at the end. I spent the entire runtime of If thinking about Fiona Shaw in Andor instead, because If was terrible and Fiona Shaw was incredible in Andor. And it also makes you appreciate, I think, because I knew her from Harry Potter, I maybe thought she was just that old and decrepit. She's not. She's like awesome and still like vigorous and full of life. And she was acting, turns out.
Yeah. I mean, head versus heart were being discussed, and I said when I'm ranking Star Wars, I'm going to go with my heart. With my head, Andor is the best thing that has come out of Star Wars since 1980. Like it's Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Andor, and then we can discuss after that. But it's incredible. As mentioned earlier, my big thing with season 2 is I'm just worried it won't live up to how much I love the first season. It to me a clear no doubt that there's a lot of jostling for spots on other spots on just my own list, let alone when we're trying to do it together. But this was easy.
So then what's number 2? I have a heart. I mean,
what's 2 and 3 together in my mind?
Because I would say because we split up the Mandalorian into 3 seasons, which I believe is a smart way to do this. I said that before we started recording. That changes things for me because if I have to rank The Mandalorian overall, it probably dips a little bit lower. But if we're just isolating, there's nothing that really can compete for me with the thrill of watching Mando season 1. I don't know. But then there's the end of Mando season 2. That's nuts. Just totally nuts.
Yeah. To me, Mando season 2 is in second on my list because and Mando season 1 is 3. That's where I am with this top 3. And one was because season 1 was thrilling, but season 2 was to me the sort of like, oh great, like we have like all this new stuff and the folding in of pre-existing Filoni animated series stuff, and then obviously building up to the big finale with pre-existing before Dave Filoni, which we have to remember existed. Getting all of that and that momentum and the way that this show that had started as sort of this loosely episodic, but still kind of serialized, it just got more. It had that feeling of like, okay, like the video game quest element of okay, go to this checkpoint, do this thing, now go to that. Like the momentum that built over time to me makes season 2 better. And I can go either way because I think that you're right, Jen.
But here's the thing, Greg's not really a Mando guy, so we have a problem, right? I assume.
Yeah, I mean, I greatly love those seasons of television, but I have never found myself being most interested in the underworld parts of Star Wars. So I can only play my cards the way I dealt them to myself. So my ranking, I'll just put this out there, as this was where I would land if you two suddenly cut off the Zoom call and I got to end it. I went Andor, Kenobi, Acolyte. And I mainly say that because I think it's important to put out there that I put the Acolyte that high. And in this world where there's a lot of negativity. Now, PT, a minute ago when you said the kind of flawed, but I love them, that's me with Kenobi. I got to sit with you two fine people at the world premiere of Kenobi, where we saw the movie stars. We got to walk the red carpet. There was, a live performance from John Williams of the brand new Kenobi theme show. Even though the season of television has nothing to do with those things. And, I should also confess, in case long take listeners don't know, Kenobi's my favorite character. There was no way I wasn't going to inflate my grade on that show. There are deeply flawed things in that show, but the kind of getting Ewan again, getting Hayden back, it's all such a gift to me and wrapped up in those incredible experiences that it's always going to rank very high for me. Now, I have no illusions that this list is going to end with Kenobi probably higher than 4. So in the question on the table, I think I have to go with Mando 1 over Mando 2. PT, you made me think about Cold Stone Creamery. Just to mention another great food chain. At Cold Stone Creamery, you pick out your delicious flavor of ice cream, and then they're like, oh, but don't you want some chocolate chips? And we'll fold it all into that, right? And that felt like what you were saying. It's like, oh, the base level ice cream of Mando then got all these things folded into them and added into them. And I do think that was really fun, and I have never screamed silently with more passion at 5 a.m. at my television than when you see the X-Wing and you see the man step out and you see the green lights. It's a beautiful moment. But I also love Mando season 1 because it had what we were just saying Acolyte has, which is it was totally separate and on its own. And it just means this one thing. It's this guy and Baby Yoda, and we're going to learn all about this. And then it lost some of that magic across season 2 when it's like, JK, he knows Ahsoka, he knows Luke Skywalker. He even held the Darksaber once, or I don't remember all the episodes. So wow. I will say I would put 1 above 2. So I propose, since I know I'm losing the other fight, it's Andor, Mando 1, Mando 2.
I could sign off on that. My personal list is flipped, but that's great. These are interchangeable in quality, basically.
I'm torn now about where it'd rank the Acolyte relative to Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think I put it above, but not,
I would. Well, here's what I want to say while you mull that is I think the real divide here is the degree to which we are into the animated Filoniverse. And it's that, Mando season 2 and also Ahsoka, which we're getting into that mushy middle now. Ahsoka very clearly is such a derivation of Rebels and a follow up on that. I shouldn't say derivation, but a follow up on that. But Mando season 2 was just sort of like bringing in these characters that had started in the Clone Wars but carried forward into Rebels, and then building up to Luke Skywalker, of course. But that was thrilling, and that was great because I was like, oh my god, I love Bo-Katan because I loved her in the animated series, and this is great, and I can't wait to see. The mention of Grand Admiral Thrawn was like, oh, we're going to find out what happened at the end of Rebels. And, I don't think we're spoiling the crowd to say that, Greg, you're not as into Rebels. It's a thing that you watched. And I don't even know if you've ever gone back and watched it again. I think that you've probably just done it one time.
I've tried with my son, and we usually make it about halfway through season 1, and both of us lose interest in the project. But that doesn't really mean too much.
It's in the way that I was saying, it's really easy to put Andor up at the top of this list. One of my great wrestlings is which I'd put above if we were doing this with the animated series. I think I'd put Rebels over Clone Wars, but that's a really hard divide to make. But I really love Rebels. I think that's one of the gems of the Star Wars universe. So yeah, I think that's part of the divide, is that, to me, those first 2 seasons of Mando, especially season 2, plus that season of Ahsoka, keep all of those above. I have to I guess, to transition in that mushy middle. I have Ahsoka at the top of it, then the Acolyte, and then Book of Boba Fett, and then Obi-Wan Kenobi. I've lost the Book of Boba Fett battle. That's fine. But these all have like clear problems that anyone could point to and be like, I don't like it because of this. And I would say, yeah, that's absolutely right. It's there. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But it has things that I love. And just as Greg loves, particularly loves Obi-Wan Kenobi, I also love Obi-Wan Kenobi, to be clear. The character, and I love the show, even though it should have been a movie. But yeah, I personally would put Ahsoka over the Acolyte, and it's not that difficult for me to do that. I'm not against flipping that for our list, but that's personally where I am.
I think a big question in terms of our rubric is like, how much are we rewarding bold, new, fresh ideas? Because I'm thinking about the pathos of Obi-Wan Kenobi or something like that, where the highs of that show really get me where I feel things. You know what I mean? Like it's like that was a terrible way of saying that, but you know what I mean? Like the pathos of like seeing Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi, like that's something that's hard to compete with just on its own. But at the same time, that's really relying on my previous relationship with the character, right? That's using a lot of other things as a crutch, kind of. Whereas the Acolyte really has this challenge of striking out on its own, introducing something new, really challenging people's fundamental beliefs about Star Wars in multiple ways, right? I think a lot of the people who did not like the show very strongly, it comes down at the core of, do you need your light side and dark side characters to be in neat buckets, right? Do you need the light side characters to be good, always good? Maybe they forget to tie their shoes one morning, but like otherwise they're good. You know what I mean? Like, whereas this show is, as we've said, like really turning everything upside down and being like, well, what if the Qui-Gon stand-in actually turns out to be this like emotional maniac? That's being reductive, but like, and then the person we're trained to think is the evil person who's going to murder everybody and is like plotting to take over the universe, but not really, as we've discussed earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What if that person is the kindest on the show and the most caring and the most supportive of the main character, right? Like, and that to me, I feel like, and again, I can't help, I'm sure it's same for both of you as well. I can't help but think about, like, if I were grading these as student papers, the Acolyte, I feel like, is that high wire act of a paper that gets super messy and is not perfect, and like we're gonna have to do another draft clearly before we send this anywhere. But to me, gets the little bit higher grade because I applaud the risk that it takes, right? To be like, you didn't quite pull it off, but I can see what you're trying to do, and I really like that. And that's way better than the safe, perfectly formed, structured, familiar paper.
Ahsoka is the 5-paragraph essay. Is that the thesis?
No.
I'm hearing?
I do like that way of thinking about it. I want to, I don't know if this changes any of our thoughts on it, but another way that, like, looking at my list is looking at the collection of things. I do feel like it's interesting as a reflection of what Star Wars is. And by Star Wars, I'm talking not about the franchise, but the original movie. Like, George Lucas, like, what are the things that you liked? And he's like, I like Westerns, I like samurai movies, and I like war movies. And like, the war movie is Andor. And that's, kind of it. That's all we've really gotten in the terms of like the fight for freedom and all of that stuff. And that's slotted where it is. That's fine. The Western, like the scum and villainy side of Star Wars, we have in the 3 seasons of Mandalorian plus the Book of Boba Fett. We've figured out our group ordering on that. What we're discussing is the samurai force wielding Jedi mystical component, which is what these 3 are dealing with: Ahsoka, Acolyte, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Which of those deals with that the best? Jen, I think your point about like, along with the storytelling, I do think the Acolyte does the most interesting things. My bias is I still lean towards Ahsoka doing it the best but that's also, that only works. I wouldn't say only works, but it works to the degree that it does work for me because of all the backing I have of 7 seasons of Clone Wars, 4 series of seasons of
Yeah.
Rebels.
Yeah, you're factoring
Episodes
in
of
the
the other
animated
things.
show in a way I'm trying not to, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, again, full heart, like I'm admitting that. But I like, and the Acolyte, you can go in fresh, you can go in clean, sort of, but then the way in which what you're saying is like, oh, this is really interesting.
Mhm.
Is that interesting in and of itself, or is that interesting in contrast to what we've seen in everything else? Which
I
kind
think
of
I'm
brings us...
recusing myself too much with Ahsoka because Ahsoka is my favorite character, and so I'm like, well, I can't possibly be objective with ranking that. But I like what you're saying about it. How about this for this? I'm gonna read the current ranking that I have, and then I will hear objections, things you cannot abide. Okay. So we have number 1, Andor. Number 2, Mando season 1. Number 3, Mando season 2. This is a good day for Mando. Number 4, Acolyte. 5, Kenobi. 6, Ahsoka. 7, Mando season 3. 8, The Book of Boba Fett. What's the one thing you're like, I cannot let this slide?
I don't know if there's anything I cannot let slide. I think Ahsoka's too low.
Okay.
But
Greg, what about you?
I mean, I object to everything like a good Star Wars internet fan, but I will say I will garner some future Oscar Fairy points or some such by saying, in a conciliatory move, I can allow Ahsoka to go above Obi-Wan Kenobi for some of the things that were said, right? So I think part of that is my heart has already lost. And, I've seen Kenobi fall from very high on my list towards the bottom. And I do think the validity of me not being attached to the Rebels characters is not lost on me either, that I do think that that's a part of it. And I think there's a very good debate related to what we were talking about people not wanting to do homework anymore, about whether that's successful or not. But I do think, as I think about impact, I do think I can put Ahsoka above Kenobi. Kenobi was a beautiful little goodbye to the prequel era that was a surprise, and we didn't know we were going to get it. So I think that means Kenobi slides to 6 and Ahsoka to 5. And
yep, that's what I have.
That means PT can't be too mad that you and I forced Acolyte above Ahsoka.
Yeah.
And I'm not mad about that. I think that's fair. Again, like, I generally think of things ranking in tiers, and like, my top 3 are our top 3. My middle 4 are our middle 4. No, that's not true. But whatever, it's close enough. But it's all, I had Ahsoka and the Acolyte flipped, but in those two are lined up in terms of positions. And then, I'm just here on my little island saying Book of Boba Fett is better than everyone remembers, even though it has parts that are quite bad. But it's better than you remember, is what I'll say. When we're finally getting towards Mandalorian and Grogu, and people go back and watch Mando 1, 2, 2.5 / Book of Boba Fett, and then 3, I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised at the time they have with Book of Boba Fett. And I will take this little opportunity to say the show should have been billed as The Mandalorian : The Book of Boba Fett, because then it would have been clearer that this was a continuation of the Mandalorian world and not a side story. But I don't know if that would have fixed the problem.
I think that just flips the criticism, because then people are just going to be like, why is there so much Boba Fett in my Mando?
Well, I also think that Mandalorian season 3 should have been called The Book of Bo-Katan, and then just make Bo-Katan the main character. Sure. And that would have set the expectations for that clearer, and also maybe let them focus more. Anyway, great. So read it off again, Jen. Let's go from the bottom up so we can build to happiness.
Number 8, Book of Boba Fett. This asterisk, whatever PT just said. 7, Mando season 3. 6, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Asterisk, what Greg would say. 5, Ahsoka. I'm actually okay with Ahsoka being dead in the middle. I think that's a good place for me to mentally to be with it. For the Acolyte, 3 Mando season 2, 2 Mando season 1. Although PT would probably have those shared the second place. And then number 1 unanimously Andor.
Mando season 1 and Mando season 2 would bow on the podium
Yes,
to Andor. That's
it
what
would.
that's the image. Yeah. Sorry, it's hard to invoke that incredible, iconic image given all that's happened since that.
Well,
but,
no, I mean, the Acolyte has filed an appeal, and so it's actually going to end up now.
I mean, what I was saying earlier, you could argue is like a difficulty rating, right? It's the
that's true.
Anyway,
I mean, I think the takeaway is there's some really excellent. I think there's everything can be criticized, but there's some really strong seasons of television, and then some wobbly ones, but ones that there's love for. I think all of them. I think everyone has things they love, even on our bottom 2 that we have. That is the bottom of all of our lists.
I'm going to close this out with something that PT turned to me and said when we finished watching the first 2 episodes of The Acolyte at the El Capitan Theater in LA.
Jen, that's no Book of Boba Fett.
Way to ruin the moment, Greg. He turned to me. He was like a couple seats down from me. He turned to me. He's like, "You know what's great? Star Wars."
It's true.
I said, "It is. Star Wars is great." Because I think we're criticizing and quibbling because it's fun and we're making a podcast. But at the end of the day, all of us love all the Star Wars content we've gotten, no matter how we feel about it. So that's a good note to end on, I think. All right, Greg, you're the one who's carrying the Star Wars torch probably going forward, though I don't know when, because Skeleton Crew's not till December. But where can people find you outside of this podcast?
It does look like December for the next time I'll host a Star Wars podcast. Although we're threatening to do more Acolyte coverage, I have not gotten the call. People can find me online at EyeonCanon, EYEONCANON. Hey, did I shock and amaze you with my deep knowledge of canon? That's my online brand. Find me those places.
Love it. And PT, remind folks where they can follow the show.
They can subscribe to the podcast wherever they get their podcasts, wherever they're listening right now. They can just go ahead and subscribe. They can rate and review us as well. They can tell their friends to listen if they think their friends would like this. They can also go and look for it on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. They can get updates from us on social media, Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, or on Letterboxd at both the account at LTR Pod and the hashtag LTR Pod.
And you can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. And yes, because we're talking about the Acolyte, if you for some reason have not been seen my written reviews, but really are still with us after all 2 hours of talking about the show, then go to thelongtake.substack.com. You can go back and read all of the episodes I was writing week to week. I finally finished my finale one, woefully overdue. And probably like only half written, but it's up. It's there. All right. Thank you both. This was super fun. May the Force be with you.
The Force will be with you always.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel. So, Jude Law, huge movie star. Why is he in this? That's my first question. Do we know?
I'm confident there's going to be one of the standard interviews of like, well, my kids absolutely love, and so when they offered it to me, but the real answer is he's getting paid a ton of money.
Okay, sure. And I guess he was a Marvel villain technically, so like just no one remembers that. So he's already part of the Disney system.
And he's been on TV before. He was a young pope or a new pope.
Oh, okay.
Not one of the 2 popes, but the young pope.
Yeah, he was a young pope.
PT's right.
But not a new pope.
Oh, yeah. I remember this. Too many popes.
Yeah.
Too Pope, Too Furious.
That's our sitcom coming out. Too many
Too
popes.
many popes. Too many.
Long Take Review presents.
Well, yeah, because like also Conclave, the Oscar movie that's going to be coming out in the fall. Like, also
which trailers are out heavy now, which is very exciting.
Oh, they are? I don't think I've seen those.
Oh, I've seen it a couple times.
Okay,
I'm here for it.
Okay, all right, you're here for the Pope thriller. Okay.
When we have a joke in my family, which is so not worth sharing publicly, get ready to edit this out. When I drive by Bertucci's, I often say to my wife, because I'm a wonderful spouse, honey, are you hungry for a taste of the Tucci? And when she says no, I said, do you mean Bertucci's or Stanley Tucci? So when I saw the Conclave trailer, I said, I'm hungry for a taste of the Tucci because he looks amazing in that.
Oh, wow. Now I'm just thinking about when the last time I went to a Bertucci's was. I could have gone when I was on vacation. Anyway, I don't know where to go from there.
I can see a frozen PT.
That sounds like... what aisle in Target is that in?